Welcome to Bible study. We're preparing this Bible study for the 17th of August in 2023 at St. Michael's Lutheran Church. And we have begun a study of the book of Acts, the continuation of the gospel according to St. Luke. And we have last week spent a little bit of time talking about what we know about why Luke wrote this book and the conclusions we reached in the class that we held on Sunday was there's still a lot of questions. It's not entirely clear why Luke wrote this book, other than he tells us to help Theophilus know more about some things that he has been taught. But we wondered who Theophilus is. We wondered how we are to understand this book now as something the Holy Spirit has delivered unto us. It's an ongoing question. We really hope to explain a little bit of this and explore some of this as we continue through this book. This week, as we continue into the first chapter of the book of Acts, we're going to look at two primary stories. And the first of them is the ascension of Jesus retold here in Acts, which he also told at the end of the gospel according to Luke. So we'll look at both of those on Sunday. But then we also want to look at the choosing of a new disciple, someone to replace Judas, who by his betrayal and his subsequent self-inflicted death is no longer able to serve as a witness. So to get us ready for that, let's just look at a couple of things I want to point out to you in this narrative so that you're ready to maybe come and talk to us on Sunday, or maybe to study this a little bit further yourself. While Jesus was staying with them, he ordered them not to depart from Jerusalem, but to wait for the promise of the Father, which he said, "You heard from me. For John baptized you with water, but you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit not many days from now." If you remember, the Gospels tell us about the ministry of John the Baptist. And John had several points, says, I come baptizing with water, but he who comes after me will baptize you with fire. And when John says that, in the context in which he says it, it really comes across as judgment. It comes across as that the one who is coming after John is going to be a heavy weight compared to John the Baptist, who is only baptizing with water. But as in fact it plays out, Jesus does baptize his disciples with fire. But it is not an act of judgment. It is an act of his redemptive work as he pours out the Holy Spirit of God upon them on the Pentecost day. That's going to come next chapter. We're here talking about those uncomfortable 10 days which are in between the ascension of Jesus and the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. But already Luke wants us to know that this is a Spirit-driven event. That it is the Holy Spirit who is driving these events. Until then, he says, wait. Wait, without the Spirit you cannot do. Wait. Once the Spirit is poured out, the time of waiting is over. But wait. So when they came together, they asked him, "Lord, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel?" The disciples, even to the very end of Jesus' ministry, do not seem to have gotten what Jesus is about. And I think Luke is very intentional in telling us that, because they didn't understand him. Do we? Is it important that we do? Do we have to understand him? Jesus will not reject them for their misunderstanding. He has never rejected Peter or John or any of the others because they have bumbled their way through his ministry. I think that's one of the points of the gospel writers, consistently depicting the disciples as being kind of thick, because Jesus can be hard to understand. What is he doing? What is he up to right now? I don't know. And my guess is you don't always know either. That's okay. Jesus said to them, "It's not for you to know the time or the seasons that the Father has fixed by his own authority, But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you. Power. You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. You want to pay attention to that progression, because what Luke has just given us is really the outline of the book of Acts. The disciples are given power, a powerful witness, a powerful word to speak. And that will go from Jerusalem into Samaria, into Judea, and from there into Samaria, and from there into the ends of the earth. That is the outline of the book of Acts. It's going to start with a ministry in Jerusalem. They're going to expand that into Judea. Philip is going to go into the Samaritan communities, and then you're going to get the word of Paul, or the word about Paul and his missionary journeys all the way. And he's only going to track it to the west. We know that the other disciples went in other directions, but he'll track that to the west, and he'll take us all the way to the end of the Roman Empire. When he had said these things, as they were looking on, he was lifted up, and a cloud took him out of their sight. And while they were gazing into heaven as he went, behold, two men stood by them in white robes and said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking up into heaven? This Jesus, whom was taken from you into heaven, will come the same way as you saw him go. We celebrate the Ascension 40 days after the resurrection of Jesus. It's always on a Thursday. Don't usually get together for a service that day. The Ascension is such an interesting event in the Gospels. I think it's led a lot of people to a misunderstanding that Jesus somehow is up in the sky, that he's gone away. But I don't think that's really true. There's a famous story told of the one time when Martin Luther met Ulrich Zwingli, who was the leader of the Swiss Reformation in Zurich. And Zwingli thought, well, Jesus is up in heaven, and he had this image of Jesus being high and far away. And Luther said, no, that's not what that means at all. I mean, only a fool would interpret it that way. And Zwingli said, well, where is he? And Luther says, he's all around us. He's gone into the cosmos. He is everywhere. You cannot leave him. He meant it when he said at the end of Matthew, I am with you always to the end of the age. We're not going to see Jesus in quite the same way we see him before. But the ascension is not about the absence of Christ, but about his presence. From here we get to this next piece of this, and that is witnesses. Who are they? What are they? Peter stands up among the 12 and he says, we've got to choose another one. We might ask, why? You have 11. But he says, we need 12. I suppose you could say there was one for each of the tribes of Israel. They need to replace it because Jesus chose 12 disciples, and now they only have 11. But I think the more important piece here is actually a bit of legal stricture from the ancient world, and that is that in the ancient world, if you had 12 witnesses to a fact, that was considered conclusive proof in a court of law. Peter realized that they were going to need to convince people. They were going to make an outlandish claim. Jesus of Nazareth, whom you crucified, as he will say in chapter 2, God has raised him from the dead. And there are 12 of us here who are willing to swear that happened. We will bear witness. In Jewish legal tradition, in most of the Mediterranean legal tradition, in fact, that meant there was no decision about whether the facts took place or not. That was conclusive. If 12 people said yes. It's why we have 12 people who sit on a jury today. It's a little remnant of that sociological assumption that they were making yet even 2,000 years ago. And so they draw straws. They put forward two men. They draw straws. They have a lot of some sort to decide who it will be. I always find it amazing that Peter's criteria for this witness is really quite strong. He had to be somebody who was with Jesus from the time of his baptism up through his resurrection. And they put forward two men, Matthias and another fellow whom they call the Just. I find it really amazing that they have two. I read my Gospels. I don't find these men listed anywhere. How many other people are floating around in this circle that the Gospels don't tell us about, or that Luke doesn't tell us about? I wonder. They cast lots, and the lot falls to Matthias. And he is numbered among the 12. And he stands up, and he bears that witness today. I'd like you to think a little bit as we read this passage. What does it mean for us to be a witness? Because Jesus isn't done collecting witnesses. You and I are witnesses. No, not to the events that happened 2,000 years ago. I wasn't there. You're not either. I read about them, and I can bear witness to what I read. But more likely, you and I are witnesses to what Jesus is doing right now. Being a witness doesn't mean you have to be a convincer. Being a witness doesn't mean that they have to listen to you. Being a witness means opening your mouth and saying what you have seen and telling people what God has done for you, for the people you love, for the people around you, for your church, in your community. Witness. There's a prosecutor, there's a defendant, there's all the other parts of the courtroom, but a witness. A witness is called upon simply to tell the truth. And I think Luke very ably starts us off by giving us this thing to think about. I'm a witness. What does that mean? That God would call me to witness to him. Think about that. Read the really interesting story. There's many troubling questions in there. If you have some of those, bring them with you to class. What is this about Judas? How do we understand him? I don't know all the time, but let's talk about it some more. God bless you. We'll see you Sunday.